guys, welcome to Take This. Griff is off today, but today I have Evan Birchmore on. You write NBA stuff, right, Evan?
I do, yes. So I write for Storm and Sting, which is the Charlotte Hornets FanSided page. And then I also run my own Hornets podcast called Bring the Sting. I launched that over the summer, but came on board with Storm and Sting back in the springtime. So mainly focus on that, but I'm an avid college football fan. As you can tell, Gamecocks are my team, but I'm a big college football fan. That was kind of my first love in a sports perspective. So very excited to be able to join the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. I always thought it was funny. Basketball, has never been my shtick, I guess you could say. I actually just had to. I do a lot of writing for the SB Nation community, similar fan site for Michigan State, and right. And I just had to cover a basketball game. I think it was last night's game against Minnesota. And I was like, looking at, past recaps and stuff, and they got all these detailed stuff. And I'm just like listing stats. That's it. And it's just so funny. Like the transfer from like football to college to basketball. I'm like, oh no, like, just so out of my realm. But yeah, man, college football it's always so sad that it's such a short season, but so I want to talk about the college football playoff first. Do you have any like predictions for Michigan, Georgia, and then Alabama, Cincinnati? Who do you think will win?
I do. And as much as I hate to say it, because it feels like just the same story playing out year in and year out, but yeah, I think we get Bama, Georgia round 2, and I think Bama takes it yet again. I will say this, something interesting that I believe is I think Georgia will beat Michigan. They're favored by a touchdown right now. Now, Michigan has a chance, no doubt. It wouldn't shock me if they win. It would really shock me if Cincinnati beats Bama. It would not shock me if Michigan wins against Georgia. But I would give Michigan a better chance against Alabama than I give Georgia.
And I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. Because I always thought that, like, you see like Michigan, what they did. I think that Alabama, I think that was like a one-off thing, I think that if a team's going to beat Georgia, it's going to be Alabama. Right. Like if it was opposite, right. You had Georgia, Cincinnati, and Alabama, Michigan. I think that there'd be a chance that Michigan wins that game, because I just seen them all year. Like they've just seemed like they have like a lot of fight in them. And it seemed like, the Michigan State game was kind of an anomaly, like it's a big rivalry, like they lost that game. But it always seemed to me that if a team's going to beat Georgia, it's going to be another SEC team. I didn't see, anything in any other team that you kind of, I didn't even think that Alabama was going to beat Georgia, to be honest. I didn't think that it was possible. And I still don't think, but yeah, like you mentioned, I don't think that, if, Michigan, I don't think again, like it would not surprise me if Michigan did beat Georgia, but you know how it goes.
Right. So, and I really think the kind of the key is, like the two main things that kind of go into that, my point of view on that game, one being, Georgia's obviously a very good team, not taking anything away from them, but I think they were made out to just be this absolute defensive juggernaut. Mm-hmm. And looking back at the teams they played, I say this with all honesty, because you see, I'm a South Carolina fan, and we were an improved team this year, but Georgia really didn't play anybody elite in the regular season. Florida turned out to not be very good. They fired their coach, Dan Mullen. Auburn was decent, but they had a first-year head coach. They fired their offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo. Clemson was not, as good as people thought they were going to be, really had no offense this year. They scored 3 points against Georgia in that game. So Georgia beat everybody on their schedule, like give them credit for that. And they scheduled Clemson. Obviously, Clemson's been great in recent years, so you can't necessarily blame Georgia. They didn't go out of their way to schedule an easy schedule per se. But I think things were a little bit inflated based on that schedule. And then they come up against Alabama, and it's just, by far the best team they've played to this point this season. And then the other thing that, I know Jimbo Fisher did beat Nick Saban this year. This is the first time ever that a former assistant coach under Nick Saban has beaten him as a head coach. And I just think Nick has Kirby Smart's number. I mean, every time Georgia and Bama play, the national championship in 2017, the SEC championship in 2018, the SEC championship this year. I mean, if they meet again for the college football national championship, what evidence and proof do we have to put our money on Kirby Smart? So all that being said, Bama's my pick, although, it's not really a glamorous pick. I'm not that excited about making that pick, but
right.
We'll see how it plays out.
Well, and like, cause I made a prediction on our podcast actually, like earlier in the season. We were actually going over, it wasn't actually really a well set prediction, but we were going over the this ESPN Plus article, and they had said that Georgia hasn't won a national title since 1980, and they were kind of like the underachievers in the sport, right? Like you could put them up there with like Michigan, right? Like Michigan was supposed to be this contender since Jim Harbaugh came along, and they haven't fought for a Big Ten title up until this year. They haven't fought since 2004, 2003, whatever it was, And but Georgia's kind of in actually probably the best team to underachieve. Like if we're being honest, like they're this they're in a good location to be successful. They are a part of the SEC. So if they just do their job in the games, and they could just again it's overcoming that dynasty in Alabama really. And again, they haven't won since 1980, so it's very interesting to see that how that played out. And again, like you mentioned, like I looked back at their schedule and I was like, wait, how come I was giving all these teams like all this crap for not playing anybody like Cincinnati, right? Like Cincinnati, the only team they got on their schedule was like Notre Dame, and I mean maybe Houston, but like again, like, and I'm giving them all this stuff, and then I go to Georgia's schedule and I'm like, well, it's kind of the same thing it's a little bit different, obviously Power 5 school versus Group of 5, but still, it's their schedule is just kind of intent on scheduling matters. It's not like Georgia went out of their way, but yeah, it's crazy to I hate to say that Alabama's probably going to win, but they're probably going to win.
Right.
Which isn't exciting. So have you been keeping up with the coaching carousel, everything like that?
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know how I feel, because I don't know your opinions on, like, are you for what do you like with college football expansion, the playoff? I mean,
playoff expansion. So I originally was not in favor of it, and I think the argument was, and this is going back to like 2014, the birth of the playoff, and I think it's good that we've had a few years now at Ford. We've seen how it works. We've seen maybe the pros and the cons. I do think my ideal scenario, if I was the commissioner of college football, if you will,
all right, put Evan in charge.
An 8-team playoff system with your 5 Power 5 conferences having automatic bids from the conference championships. Then you'd take the highest ranked Group of 5 teams. So this year that'd be Cincinnati, and then you'd have 2 at-large bids.
Right.
So you would just go based on conference championships. So it would be, Alabama would be in there, Michigan, obviously, Cincinnati, we just talked about,
Utah,
and so on and so forth. Baylor would be in there. And then your Pac-12 champion would be in there. So Utah this year, and then Cincinnati, and then your 2 highest ranked. It wouldn't be just some arbitrary, subjective vote. It would be whoever comes in at, I guess all the rankings end up being subjective anyways, but it would be,
sure,
your non-champion, but 2 highest ranked teams beyond the championship game winners to get you to an 8-team playoff, which I think really that where I agree with that is incentivizing winning your conference. I didn't used to, really get caught up in that being all that important as far as the playoff, because I did, believe the SEC was better than, the Pac-12 and the Big 12. And so 2 SEC teams, okay, there could be arguments for that.
Right.
But the year that kind of sticks out to me is that 2017 Bama team, which obviously was a good team because they won the national championship, beat Georgia that year to get there, beat Georgia in the championship game. But Alabama didn't even go to the SEC championship game that year. And so what it does is, you can say whatever, it's important to win the game, but like they played 1 less game. So there was 1 less data point to judge them on. It's 1 less week of wear and tear. It's 1 less opportunity for them to lose. it just doesn't seem very consistent that they would not be able to play and still get to go to the playoff, where other teams would kind of have to go out and at least play. And every time you play, there's a chance you lose. Like, just call it for what it is. Like, if Alabama had lost to Georgia last weekend, they wouldn't be in the playoff. So
right, and I think that's always been my argument with Notre Dame. Like, like they don't have a conference championship game. Notre Dame never does. So, like, you know what I mean? I've always been like, just join a conference. What's wrong with you? But they want to keep their NBC contract or whatever they got. But
yeah, no, I agree. And I know last year when they made the playoff, still lost to Alabama, but I agree with you on that 100%. And they were, they kind of have this sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out agreement with the ACC, where they play a certain amount of ACC games, but they're technically not in the ACC.
Right.
So last year they were, because of the COVID restrictions and the conference only schedules, and they did have to go play the ACC championship game. It was actually here in Charlotte against Clemson, which they lost. But if you remember, they had beaten Clemson in the regular season last year. So I think they kind of earned that trip to the playoff last year in 2020, more so than they have, like, for instance, in 2018 when they made it. I think 2020 was a bit more impressive of a Notre Dame team, just by virtue of having to go at least play in a conference championship game.
Absolutely. And playing in a conference matters too, because, I mean, I don't know, like, how do they pick their schedule? They get to choose it themselves. I mean, again, like, you could manifest anything with, with that sort of thing. And it's also weird too, because I cover college hockey, which is like absolutely forbidden to talk about in the public space because nobody cares. But it's weird because Notre Dame's a Big Ten team. So I gotta say like this is a Big Ten matchup. Michigan State's playing Notre Dame this weekend. I'm like, that's weird. That's just odd to say, sort of thing.
Right.
But it is weird that and again, I think they have like I don't know if it's a contract thing or just something they do where they schedule 5 ACC games a year. I think BYU does the same thing with the Pac-12, although I could be wrong. Although they're an independent team, but I don't know. But you're right. Yeah, I think that a lot of people are going to want to have something or some system set in place where they want the conference champion to matter, specifically because an expansion to the college football playoff makes it seem like the season doesn't matter, like it's not valued, since it's so simple to, again, especially based on who you schedule, like what you're trying to do. Like Wake Forest was out here scheduling an FCS school and a like Power 5, or not a Power 5, a Group of 5 school in their their non-conference games. Then you got Michigan, who didn't play a single home game until they played away game. I mean, they got all non-conference home games. And so, you know what I mean? So it's just like, at that point, you're just kind of, and a lot of SEC teams, people argue, I think they schedule a lot of FCS schools. But still it's there's an intent to schedule that matters. And I think people are going to want to see the regular season matter, and teams actually start trying to get, because again, like the drop off usually from like 1, 2, 3 to 4, 5, 6 is a lot. And people are going to want to see, I think that's the whole idea behind the 14 playoff. I think 12 is too many, but I'm just kind of, I've kind of accepted that it's probably going to happen because that's what people, are going to want. It's weird, isn't it? Because what's it called? Fox College Football posted something on Twitter that was saying, would you see, it was like 3 scenarios. One was an 18 playoff, one was a 12-team playoff. They had 16. And I was like, who's going to want to see who is number 16? Some Group of 5 school or something. There's a couple, like Houston was down there, something like that. And like, they didn't match up to Cincinnati. So it's like, how can you justify that, when you got, I don't know, whatever. But I did want to talk to you real quick about the coaching carousel specifically. And again, the college football playoff kind of leads into this because you got Kenny Pickett, and this isn't relating to the coaching carousel, but in a way, Kenny Pickett not or may not appear in the Peach Bowl against Michigan State. You got Brian Kelly leaving Notre Dame as a head coach, even though Notre Dame still could have made a college football playoff.
That's just so bizarre to me. That...
I think that was what got everyone. And I didn't even watch the video because I just had no respect for that. But I think the Kenny Pickett thing is interesting because you have a Pitt team that hasn't won, I think, an ACC since 1976. My dad was 6 years old. Something like that. The year could be wrong, but still, like, it's been a while for Pitt. So this is basically like their Super Bowl for forever ago. And so you have like their quarterback who's a Heisman candidate, and he's leaving the school. He's not, not playing in their New Year's Six bowl game that they got into. Do you think that there is like a way to fix this sort of thing where you're kind of not seeing coaches leave till after the season's over? You're not seeing players not finish the season with their teams. Like, it doesn't seem great for the sport.
Right. Yeah. And I get you. I think the main sort of barrier to that, and it's relatively new, is this new early signing period, right? Where coaches, if you're going to leave, you need to go ahead and go and get there because you have to hit the ground running in recruiting, right? That's why a Lincoln Riley, a Brian Kelly, we see Mario Cristobal now going to Miami. Right. So this early signing period has so incentivized, and obviously recruiting has always been the lifeblood of college football. Like, that's a very cliche thing to say, but it is a very true thing to say. It is just, and I definitely, in a perfect world, you would stay and kind of see out the season, see out that team, those guys, those players that you've, poured all that time and energy and effort into. But in the same token, like, you almost kind of owe it to your future team as well to go ahead and start building, because otherwise you're already kind of going to be behind the eight ball, from that perspective. I know last year was a bit of an anomaly. Kind of the specific example I'm going to bring up was South Carolina had a first-year head coach this year, Shane Beamer. He was an assistant coach at Oklahoma in the couple of years prior to that, and he stayed at Oklahoma for the Big 12 championship game last year after he had accepted the South Carolina job. Now, there were a certain group of South Carolina fans who, maybe upset isn't the right word, but we're just sort of curious, why is he staying? Why didn't he just go ahead and come to Columbia? Well, last year with all the COVID restrictions and couldn't go for in-person recruiting visits, there was really nothing that he could have done in person. Well, I take that. There's really nothing he couldn't do while remaining at Oklahoma through the bowl game and through the Big 12 championship game. So last year was a bit of an outlier, but I definitely understand what you're getting at. And I think it's less that coaches are leaving, right? Like, they're the same as all of us. If a better opportunity comes up, by all means, they're not, just bound for eternity to these programs. But there is, not to sound too old school, but there is such a way as leaving gracefully and leaving, just if I was on Notre Dame or if I was at Oklahoma, I would feel a little bit stiffed by that. I would feel a little bit almost disrespected in a way by the way, like, there's no way Lincoln Riley in the matter of less than 24 hours decided to take that USC job. Like, he, right. I think in his mind, and if you watched Oklahoma, right. And if you watched Oklahoma the last several games of the year, they were just not up to par. And I think, I don't want to say he already had one foot out the door, but like, that thought had to be in his mind. You don't make a decision that big. You don't just wake up and decide to go take the USC job. Same with Brian Kelly. And what was, it was a 4-minute kind of speech or whatnot he had with his players.
Some video where he just kind of said, bye, see you guys. No questions asked.
And he just went down to Louisiana and did that thing at the basketball game at LSU where he had the fake Southern accent. And so, go take the jobs. No one is, I'm all for that,
Yeah.
But in the same token, and I'm saying that as someone, in the 2015 season, Steve Spurrier essentially like quit on South Carolina halfway through the year. And as great as he was, he's the best coach we've ever had at South Carolina. And I still have really high respect for him, but that left us in an awful place. Yeah. Like, you kind of owe it to those players, those fans, those boosters, you need to leave it with some momentum as well, I think.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, like leaving gracefully, I think that the big deal with, because I was fine with the whole Lincoln Riley thing to USC. And yeah, that kind of sucked because like you mentioned with they just didn't seem in it. It wasn't, it just seemed like a little bit of them had like already left, and like Oklahoma just wasn't like there, and I don't know if that was a coaching, whatever, but obviously you see it. weird thing, obviously, about Notre Dame is that they were in line to make the playoff. Like, they had that opportunity. I mean, if, and any number of things could have happened, nothing did happen. But, if there are arguments that you could make, and I'm not saying that these are the right arguments or whatever, but there are arguments that you could make about, like, if Cincinnati, even with the win against Houston in the AAC championship game, like, you could say that Notre Dame, like, had a harder schedule or was more deserving of that number 4 spot than, whatever. And obviously not playing a conference championship game might go into that, but there is at least the argument that they could make the college football playoff, and not just leaving and disappearing kind of erases all of that. Like, there's no longer, like, again, like Gary Barta said on the CFP, I think the second to last committee selection, he was like, yeah, we take coach leaving and stuff like that into consideration. And I'm like, well, these players are just kind of not in a good place, and it just kind of feels very unfortunate for them or whatever.
Right.
So it seems weird. I think that one thing that's interesting, I mean, again, like, about the Kenny Pickett thing and players kind of leaving, because again, if I guess if players can leave, coaches, if coaches can leave, players can leave. But Kenny Pickett surprised me, because I don't know why I always figured that he would play through that season, just because, again, that meant so much to Pitt. Again, it's like a New Year's Six bowl. It just meant so much to them, and I don't know, like, again, I know there's like the injury stuff. I always think it'd be interesting, and this is just an idea that I float out there, but the NIL stuff with bowl games, I feel like is going to be really popular, in the sense of, like, hey, we're going to pay you $1 million to play this game, because you know how much it'd mean for the school in recruiting if you have like a star on your team like that, in that
right.
bowl game, and stuff like that. Like, if Kenneth Walker III, and I don't know if he's going to, if he plays in Michigan State's game against Pitt, like that, I mean, that's going to be huge for Michigan State in the recruiting process. Do you think there's any way to fix that? I mean, obviously the NIL stuff is one way, but do you think there's any way that like players play through the season?
I think there are several ways it could go. I don't know if any of them are a perfect solution, but you bring up a very, very good point as far as, look, I'm not the type to like blame players for sitting out bowl games. Totally understand the logic. South Carolina a few years ago had, if you keep up with NFL, Deebo Samuel on the San Francisco 49ers, he was at South Carolina a few years ago and sat out of our bowl game to get ready for the draft. And he had, a few injuries in college, some severe injuries in college. And so I think general consensus of the fan base was, get ready, go to the draft, do your thing. I think the NIL stuff's very interesting because that wasn't around yet, and it's very new and there's a lot of unknown, I believe, with it still. But I'm with you. If there's some, I guess what you're saying is some incentive baked in where it's okay, X amount of dollars for playing in the bowl game. If you don't get the money for it. Like, essentially, like, you have,
I mean, you're bribing them, right?
In the bowl game, right?
Right, exactly. Or at least, I mean, even just be there, just to be there is kind of a big deal. Even if they don't play.
Yeah, and I mean, the bowl game, look, there is value like in bowl games. Obviously, not everybody can win the national championship every single year. But I even think back to, I'm sure you'll appreciate as a Michigan State fan, but the year that South Carolina, we played Michigan in the Outback Bowl, and Jadeveon Clowney just knocked the guy's helmet off, and it was on SportsCenter top 10 for like 8 months in a row. And that pretty much made him the number 1 draft pick the next year, because that was his sophomore season when that happened. He had one more year left with South Carolina. He had a good season, but not maybe up to the par that, I mean, the hype machine just got so out of hand with that, because from that point on, everybody expected him to hit every single running back's helmet off every single play. And that's just not realistic. But that one play made him the number 1 draft pick the next year. Like, I still would argue that. And so exposure is still valuable, but I'm with you where, maybe there's a monetary incentive tied in. I know the bowl games do these things. You get, some type of a gift package or whatnot. You get maybe, headphones and some clothes or whatever for going to the bowl game. But if this NIL stuff, I'm a big fan of it because everybody was seeing money except for the people who are actually like producing the product that drives all the revenue.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and I think it's super great. Like, I mean, I can get my NCAA football video game back. So,
right.
That's at some point, hopefully, obviously. So we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, anyone. We're going to talk about Heisman snubs and everything right after this. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Evan Birchmore. We got lots of actually, we're going down to the end of it with some Heisman stuff. Did you catch the Heisman, whatever you call it, the nominations for Heisman?
Yeah, so we got 4 this year. It's C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Kenny Pickett, and then Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan. So It's 4. You got 3 QBs and then 1 defensive player. So kind of want to hear your take on that, and then I'll follow up.
So I was actually not even around, I think, when it came out or something. I forget what I was doing. I might have been at school or something when they announced them, whatever. My Griff, actually, our co-host, texted me. He's like, he's not in. Oh my God, he's not in. That's what he sent me. And I'm like, what happened? I mean, it's not surprising, but at the same time, it's frustrating. And I've also looked at this with a little bit more perspective, and it is so irritating though. And especially since he had all that momentum leading up to, and obviously you saw it. The dude looked like incredible. You saw with, the way he was able to just maneuver through defenses and stuff like that. I mean, he left Michigan with 5 touchdowns. Obviously, had that injury versus Ohio State. And after Michigan State got down so much, it was like, why even try playing him? And stuff like that. So, like, obviously, we know he stubbed half of America, or snubbed, sorry. Half of America thinks he's snubbed. It's upsetting to me, but at least, like, I know exactly why this happens, and why you're seeing so many players or that should be deserving. I mean, we saw it with Christian McCaffrey that year that Derrick Henry won the Heisman. Nobody's gonna give it to this guy from Stanford. Like, why do that? Whatever. But yeah, football brand goes into it. Heisman hype goes into it. It's obviously a lot of recency bias because of the November stuff, but it's frustrating. I think it's even more frustrating for Michigan State fans since Aiden Hutchinson was there. And that is very upsetting because, he's a great player, but I don't think that a defensive player should go like 9 out of 10 times. Just to be nominated, because it's very rare that you see a breed that is that unique. If I could name a couple, I would say obviously Charles Woodson, who won the Heisman at Michigan. But then there's Ndamukong Suh, and that's like all I could say. And that's because Ndamukong Suh was so good. And it's hard to, and Aiden Hutchinson is a great player, but he's not Heisman worthy. And I feel like there's sort of a prestige with the Heisman Trophy that they amplify and they talk about. And then at the end of the day, it's not actually reality. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot to dive into with that. Kind of categorize what I want to get into. So the Aiden Hutchinson thing and defensive players, I think what the Heisman has sort of devolved into is it's pretty much, okay, take the top whatever, like you probably need to be a playoff team, most likely, not necessarily, but it really helps. And then whoever the best offensive player is on one of the playoff teams, they're the Heisman winner. And look, the whole, I understand, like, it's essentially the same as the MVP in the NFL, right? Like, it's pretty much a quarterback award, whether it be Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or whoever it is. So the thing is, the quarterback has the ball so much more often than every other player on the field. He has the ball in his hands every single play, whether he hands it off, whether he throws, RPO, whatever it is. a quarterback just has so much more impact on the game of football than any other position that I do understand why it favors them. The thing is, if you want it to have fair representation from other position groups, you can't just get the quarterback just has the ball so much more than everybody else. It's really hard to replicate.
And it's really easy for them to impact the game so much. Like if you're a running back, like, I mean, again, like you saw with Kenneth Walker III, like, I mean, I know, and again, like I've talked about how great he is, whatever, but like, it's not a position that it's not like, if you're going to say in the NFL draft, right? Like you're drafting 0 through 5, right? So if you're the top 5 pick the draft, are you going to take a cornerback? Are you going to take, I mean, the Lions will, but nobody else will. Are you going to take a cornerback? Unless you have other positional needs, like if you don't have a single good player on that team, who are you going to take? You're probably going to take either a quarterback or some sort of, maybe a wide receiver or something like that. Or I mean, again, it depends on who's there, but you're not going to take a position where that is going to have a lesser impact on the game. And like, I mean, with Kenneth Walker, you're seeing like there were games, I think, again against a few teams, like Nebraska names one, or I forget what else he played, which games he had lesser impact in, but he had lesser impact in those games because Michigan State had to pass the ball. Like teams are going to have better run defenses. I mean, Michigan State had the worst pass defense in the league, and their run defense was like top 40, so it's, their run defense was just a lot better. So teams had more of a difficult time running the ball. And again, it's very hard to impact the game from a running back perspective, like you said.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. And so the thing about getting back to the Hutchinson thing is that I think, look, I'm all for defensive players being up for the Heisman. Like I've always been on board with that. I really wanted Sue to win it the year that he was a finalist for it. But the thing about Hutchinson is there's a more deserving defensive player this year, I believe, and that's the Anderson kid from Alabama, who hasn't beaten every single statistical category, at least the major ones. Hutchinson, I'm going to run it off. He has 58 tackles, 14 sacks, 15 and a half tackles for loss. Anderson from Alabama has 91 tackles, 15 and a half sacks, and 29 tackles for loss. They played the same amount of games because they were both in their conference championship games. So I just think it's an apples to apples comparison, and Anderson's counting stats are higher in the 3 major categories. Now it's not purely, who has the higher stats, but I just think his impact and having those, he hasn't beaten all the major categories, like I said. Getting to the Kenneth Walker thing, I did some research on this, and I think it'll really back up your point. So I think you'll appreciate this. So Mark Ingram won the Heisman. It's 2009, Alabama running back. I'm going to read off his stats because they're nearly identical to Kenneth Walker's stats this year. Mark Ingram in 2009, he had 271 rush attempts. He ran for 1,658 yards. That's a 6.1 yards per carry average. He had 17 touchdowns. Now, he did catch 32 balls for 334 yards. He caught 3 touchdowns. So they threw to him a decent amount. Kenneth Walker this year, 6.2 yards per carry, 263 attempts, 1,636 rushing yards, 18 touchdowns. He has 13 receptions, 89 yards, and a touchdown. So the difference between Kenneth Walker and Mark Ingram is that Mark Ingram ran the ball 8 more times for 22 more yards and 1 less touchdown. Now, he did catch some more passes because they threw the ball to him more. All that being said, I mean, it's just so dependent on what's going on around you. But then also, it just seems like because Alabama won the national championship that year. So if you put Kenneth Walker on that Alabama team and he has those exact same stats, or put him on this year's Alabama team, so it's not just a statistical award. And I think people know that. But, the
right.
argument that
it's hard to say because, like, again, like you compare a team like Michigan State, who had, I mean, to be honest, like it's not like they had a chance to go to the playoff, but at the same time, by Michigan's, and you mentioned the playoff absolutely helps, and that's why Michigan got a representative in the Heisman Trophy. Like I don't think that if Michigan doesn't go to the playoff, I don't think Hutchinson's there, and I think that speaks to it a lot. If or whatever. But I mean, because I don't think also Hutchinson is the reason why Michigan won against Ohio State. I mean, that's pretty hard to argue against. I I mean, just because his Stroud. And Stroud, by the way, I mean, I great player, love him. He's a great quarterback, but dude is not like Heisman. It just kind of it's a good quarterback season. Like I don't think that it was all that impressive to me, especially since in his two biggest games he lost them. And obviously, that might not be his fault based on defense, but still like, not that it factor to go above the rest, And I just think that like one thing that's just crazy stat line, and this is Big Ten's fault, but if Michigan State were to beat Purdue, Ohio State still goes to the title game because in a three-way tie, the fifth tiebreaker, and this is really interesting, but the fifth tiebreaker would have been the one that would have broken the tie between Michigan State, Michigan, and Ohio State, and Ohio State has a better non-divisional conference strength of schedule. So because the only
they played more difficult teams on the other side of the conference, essentially.
But right, exactly. And the Big Ten West it's not like it's much better. Like the difference between Michigan State and Ohio State's schedule is Northwestern and Minnesota. Ohio State played Minnesota and Michigan State played Northwestern, both first games of the season. And Ohio State's opponent, Minnesota, ended up going almost winning the Big Ten West, while Northwestern's at the bottom of the Big Ten West. And so just those two teams would have decided the Big Ten, whoever goes to the Big Ten championship. And I think that's weird. I think that's dumb. I think that there should be some sort of other metric. But who would have thought that in a three-way tie, that there would have been three teams with almost, again, identical tiebreakers 1 through 4, and then you get down to number 5. Like nobody thinks of that. And so the rarity of it happening leads me to believe that it will like never get changed unless it actually like causes a problem. But it's weird to me, again, like when you think about it, like Michigan was a Michigan State win away from not going to the college football playoff in a sense. And it's, well, I guess they theoretically they could have still got in because they just wouldn't have gone to the Big Ten title game. It's just, again, it's weird to me that again, like Michigan's, season kind of depended on a Michigan State win, loss, which is kind of ironic, when you think about it. So there's a number of people who vote on the Heisman. And I think this is the part that I really wanted to dive into, right? It's like 800 or 900 something, right?
Yeah. I did a little bit of research on this as well right before the show. Yeah. So I found it online. It's 870 journalists.
That's a lot.
All right. Plus all the every former Heisman winner who's still living, which is 57.
So I like that part.
Obviously,
I like that part.
Around, so there's some have passed. But yeah, 870 journalists plus your 57 former Heisman winners, plus one what is now a fan vote, essentially, which is an aggregation of, I'm not even exactly sure how that.
I know there was the website and it counts for a media vote, right. I think is what it was.
Right. So that comes out to being one vote. So the sum total of all those votes, it comes out to 928. It's broken up into 6 regions. And that's kind of I guess the bone I have to pick with the whole voting process is one that seems an awful lot of people. It's like, what are their credentials? How do you get, who's to say that, you're worthy of a vote or you're not?
Well, and so
that seems a little bit of a gray area.
It seems like the metric is like cover a team locally. Like that is literally it. And it was actually interesting because Graham Couch, who is he's a beat reporter for the Lansing State Journal here in East Lansing, and he has his own podcast, Couch in the Rube, and he was talking about this on his podcast and in his column at Lansing State Journal about how Kenneth Walker III. It was a really good perspective article. Kenneth Walker III was snubbed because of people like him, and the interesting part about that really is that. Like he covers Michigan State, right? But like he didn't watch a lot of these games, because like, again, like why he votes on the Heisman, but why would he catch Bryce Young every second of every day? You know what I mean? Where he's covering sometime. I mean, the night, I think that they were talking about, I think it was Kenny Pickett or something like that. Like he wasn't able to watch any of these games because he was covering a Michigan State basketball game against Toledo. And so when you think about it, like people like him aren't aren't readily ready to watch all of these games. You know, like, again, they got so much going on. You know, they're not going to, I mean, again, like, I mean, with the Christian McCaffrey stuff, like, I'm sorry, he played for Stanford. So, like, you're not going to see him, or I mean, you're not going to see him unless it's like 10 o'clock at night because of the Pac-12 scheduling. You know, so if you're not watching the games, then why would you have the, you know, so all you're going to do is go off of what, I mean, do I think that Bryce Young is deserving of winning the Heisman? Of course I do. But do I think that his season, could I go back and evaluate him just based on what I know alone? Absolutely not, because I haven't watched him in depth. But have I watched Kenneth Walker III? Of course. I've watched every second, every play. Like, I've watched every game. So why, like, again, like, what I might be a little bit like personal bias towards Kenneth Walker III rather than Bryce Young. You know what I mean? So it's just that whole product plays into it. And it's I think that the voting process would need to change in order for them to match the prestige that they set themselves at, because it's such a prestigious award. And I mean, again, like, imagine giving, like, if the MLB or NFL or NBA MVP votes, like, imagine if you gave 800 people the right to vote for that. Like, can you imagine the chaos? Like, that would be chaos, you know, just based alone. Like, I don't know. I just, again, like, they need to make it, I think, keep the past Heisman voters, but they need some sort of committee. I think that would be better, because they did that with the college football playoff, right? Like, when like they had the AP poll, and then when they were like, we're going to implement a playoff, we're going to get a lesser amount of people that are voting on this, you know, just because it's the AP poll is unreliable and unrealistic, you know, based on a team's preseason ranking that kind of determines a lot of their season and where they end up. And so, like, again, when you have like 60 or 70 media guys voting on the AP poll, like, that is a lot. And even more vote on the Heisman. But then, like, again, like, it's such an arbitrary vote. Whereas with the selection committee, it's a lot more accurate. And I know people don't like it, and I'm not a fan either, but it ends up usually sorting itself out to the top teams. And I always think that it's a lot better when you think about it, because they match teams against each other rather than taking 50 or 60 or 70 guys top lists and giving them points based on that. Like, it's a lot less arbitrary, you know, in a way.
Right.
And so, like, I think that, you know, it, again, like, it seems like anyone with a heartbeat and covering a school could get a Heisman vote. And I just don't think that's realistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. I'm with you on that. And the point you make about the Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey year is always the one that comes to my mind, where, look, I don't watch a whole lot of Pac-12 football, I'll be honest, because the games start at 10 o'clock Eastern time and I go to bed.
Yeah.
So
I'm obviously
not a Heisman voter, so I don't have an obligation to stay up for those games.
Right.
But, you know, if I were a Heisman voter, I would feel an obligation to, because I need to be informed to make my votes. Right.
Right.
And so that's the thing where it's just set up. It's regionally biased to a large degree, because you have, especially in the South region, you know, it's just like eyeballs on the games. Right. And then you always hear the term, like, his Heisman moment. Right. And that's, you know, Bryce Young's Heisman moment, the comeback against Auburn, and then the SEC championship game against Georgia. Those were fantastic moments, like, taking nothing away from that. But, like, you know, other players have, Heisman moments because they don't end up winning the Heisman, but they have moments with that level of impact. It's just not as, you know, people don't see it. I mean, it's just to call it for what it is. And so it's kind of almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy where, you know, the team has to be in the spotlight. Like, you can't win the Heisman. There are no surprise Heisman winners. You know, you can almost kind of see this stuff coming, you know, from a mile away sometimes.
Right. And I mean, yeah, exactly. I think, like, the Kenny Pickett thing is weird. I actually wrote an article in for theonlycolors.com about, like, the Kenneth Walker snub and, like, my thoughts on it, and how it just kind of seems like Kenneth Walker not being there, like, seems like kind of a joke, right? Like, it just seems like it's kind of a circus. Like, why are we here? What are we doing? You know, like I love Kenny Pickett, and I was rooting for him all season. He was one of my biggest, like, I loved, like, the Pitt story. Like, it sounds really great, right? But I'm like, dude, Heisman, really? Like, where'd that come from? It's just like, no disrespect, to him or whatever. And again, like, maybe I haven't watched Pitt's games like too much, a lot of the times because they're on the same time Michigan State's on, or I'm watching something else or busy doing something else. I'm sorry, I don't have time. But like, it just didn't seem to me like, again, when you got the ACC down this year, you got like no good Clemson team, you got no team in the top 10. It just seems a little weird to like put sort of an ACC quarterback in there. And it just seemed like if Kenny Pickett's there and Aiden Hutchinson is there, then obviously two players that I know are worse or less worthy than Kenneth Walker III, then like, again, like, maybe if you had 4 SEC playoff teams and you had the 4 SEC quarterbacks, then maybe I would reconsider that thought process. But still, like, it just seemed like it's weird that there's no place for him when you consider the actual candidates that came out,
right.
It's just, again, like, it's like, why are we here? Like, why should I care about the Heisman? I think is my point. Like, why should I care when obviously nobody cares about putting the best, like, it's not about having the best players there. So why should I care about all this prestige, about all this high? Like, do I think that he should have won? No. If maybe if they would have stayed closer with Ohio State, or he would have been the reason why they did that, then maybe so. But and with the CJ Stroud thing, I don't think that him putting up 600 or 500 yards, it was, I think, 431, but him putting up 431 yards on Michigan State's defense when they got 3 NFL receivers, you got the worst pass defense in FBS. I don't think that that's, anything impressive. So like, even he could, I mean, I don't know. Like, I always said that my ballot would be Bryce Young, Kenneth Walker III, and maybe either Desmond Ridder or CJ Stroud, depending on who you put in there. But it's, again, like, it's always been those top 2 guys. Like, I just, Bryce Young, Kenneth Walker. Like, if Kenneth Walker was on Michigan, maybe we would talk about him being like number 1. Seems like a brand issue. So where can we find you? On Evan on social media?
Yeah, so Twitter is where I'm most active as far as just engaging on sports talk. My Instagram, I keep kind of more to just personal stuff, but Twitter, be sure to follow me. It's at Evan Birchmore, EvanBirchmore. I'll be sure and follow back. I'm always down to talk college football. Might have some garnet and black colored glasses on. Gotta represent for my Gamecocks, but I'll be sure and engage with any conversations on there. I'm really, really active. I'm on Twitter, every day, talking about either NBA or college football. So be sure to find me on there.
Cool. Yeah, it was great having you on, and we will see everyone again next time. Bye.